Nice fall day in the garden. Thank you for joining me in my garden. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television. These shows are filmed in my garden, and we've followed the garden season from beginning to end and just done a few things in the kitchen and inside during the winter when we can't be outside. Right now it's a fall day. We have had a brush with frost, though it didn't quite get down low enough to kill plants. We know that's coming soon. This is early October, but by the end of October we probably will have had a killing frost, which means the temperatures go down below about 30 degrees. 32 degrees, some of the plants are damaged, but a little lower than that, and then you'll begin to see the plants turning totally brown or black. Right now we have pine needles and leaves that are dropping. We've had some wind the last few days, which has increased the process. So we have a lot of work to do when it comes to raking and cleaning up. Although I'm not going to clean up my gardens a whole lot. I'm going to let the leaves stay to add the nutrition that leaves can add. As someone once said, the trees don't die because the leaves stay in the forest. So you have to kind of remember that and leave some of the leaves in place. They provide good homes for all kinds of creatures to hibernate over the winter, mostly beneficial ones. So you want to leave some of the leaves and the stalks standing. Makes the gardener's life a little easier, and then you can get the pine needles off the lawn and the leaves off the grassy areas. In the herb garden, which is where I am now, I've gone through and picked up all my labels. I keep these inside over the winter. I pretty much know where the plants are. If I had something new that I wasn't sure I would remember, then I would leave a label in. But they last a lot longer if you take them out and put them under cover in the winter. They'll go in my garden shed. I'll cut back a few things, but not all of them. The southern wood will keep its green for quite a long time, as will all of the thymes and the lavenders. The annual things, like this geranium, can be pulled, and we'll just put that in the compost. It won't come back. And by pulling out any annual herbs, I also have a Thai basil up here, and its label can go. There was a label with it, and you can see its roots seldom left the pot area. But those things can go. The label can be discarded or kept if I want to remember that I had it. But if I left the label in, then I'd look for it to come up in the spring. And I know that as an annual, and a very tender one at that, the Thai basil will not be coming up. So I'll just get it out of there to avoid any confusion. Sage can be left in the garden. In fact, we can use the sage right up until Thanksgiving or after, depending on the weather. Also with the thyme, you can come and pick that anytime. And we have chives that are starting to wilt down, but they're not completely gone. So you can continue to use them until they are completely gone. I may cut back some of the lemon balm because it is going to seed, and I really don't need any more lemon balm. So that may get cut back. Some of the others will stay, the rue will stay, and the sweet woodruff, which is covering the shadier areas of this garden, will just melt down and provide its own mulch. We're going to move on now to the perennial garden. A little more work to do there, but not too much. If you have outdoor bird baths, you need to remove the tops of these cement bird baths. They will crack and break if they fill with ice over the winter. So one solution is just to take the top off and tip it up against the base. That way you don't have to carry it someplace and store it. You can just leave it out, but rain and snow won't collect in it, and it should not crack. Now, on to the flowers. The asters this year have been really beautiful. This is one I put in last year, which is called, I believe, Bluebird, and it is a lovely bluish purple. Most of the asters are purplish or purplish pink. I still have some of the Verbena bonariensis. I have a lot of it over on the other side, but I've added some seeds here and there, and I'll continue to do that because it makes a nice fall plant, and the butterflies absolutely love it. The same with this Eupatorium chocolate. It has darker brown or burgundy leaves earlier in the season, which add a nice accent, and then the white flowers in the fall. This has been loaded with pollinators the last few days when it's been warm and sunny. I have a Montauk daisy here, and I just put this one here recently, and it hasn't quite reached its stride. I have a few blooms on it and a few more to come. Hopefully it will increase in size a little bit and add some daisy-like flowers to this area. You can start anytime taking out your plant supports once they're no longer supporting anything. And one of the plants that I will cut back will be the daylilies. And I find for daylilies and iris, one of the best tools is a pair of scissors rather than clippers. They just seem to work better and you can move much faster. The goldenrod has finished, and if I don't cut it off, we'll have more seedlings. I'll probably collect some of its seed instead to share with anybody who really would like to start a meadow-type garden. These are New England asters, a cultivar, which means it's been worked on a little bit by the horticulturists. And this is a pink version, and we'll see the purple in just a few minutes. It too has had lots of pollinators. We have a nice bumblebee here right now, but it's been covered when the sun's out and it's a little bit warmer. Yesterday it was nearly 80 degrees, so they were just covered with all kinds of pollinators. This is the butterfly weed, and its pods have started to open. This one is already opened, and all the little fluff has escaped. We had some rain last night, which has slowed things down a little bit. And I don't know that we have another pod left to open. But you can see when you do open them that that's where all the seeds are. And again, I've been saving some of these seeds to pass along. I have plenty, but I could also add it to any meadow area, and it would provide food for the butterflies. This annual is still growing, and I can pick those off, and they will dry nicely. They're a type of plant that is quite dry. They're kind of like the straw flowers that you see, only this is a different version. So I can take those in and use them in crafts or in bouquets. One last rose. This probably is the last rose of summer. And I'm no longer deadheading the rose because I want it to form the rose hips, and we're starting to form some here. And this will tell the rose, it's over, it's time to go to bed, let's go to sleep and spend the winter dormant. You don't want new foliage, which is why you wouldn't want to prune this rose now, because then it would decide to put on all kinds of new foliage. You don't want to fertilize it either, for that matter. You don't want new foliage to come and then get killed by the winter cold. I'll leave the seed heads of things like black-eyed Susans. The birds really love them, especially the little goldfinches. And here's some more pods of the butterfly weed. Again, these have all opened and the seeds have escaped pretty much. Trying to find one with the fluff in it, but I don't think there's one here today. Autumn Joy, Sedum Autumn Joy, is coming into its own. And I leave that standing, and we'll use some of it. It will turn a darker and progressively darker color as the season goes on. We have a little pollinator on it right now, a little moth of some sort, which is sitting on the sedum. We'll let him stay. But they can then be used in some of the outdoor Christmas decorations. Again, I will look around and see what things might be used in decorations. I know the red twig dogwood is a nice accent, so we'll be sure to leave some of that or do some pruning on it. It definitely needs to be pruned back, but I won't do that until spring, except for what I want to use this fall and winter in outdoor decorations. The same goes for the smoke bush. It too needs to be pruned back quite a bit, but we'll wait till spring and see how it does. This is a purple aster, and it joins in with some of the others. And this is another type of aster. This is a wild one. And asters, if you start looking them up, you'll find they're very confusing. There are so many of them. This is a more wild type, and it does need to have been supported. So I will remember that next year, that it needs some support. Anything that's in a pot gets pulled out, the pots get emptied, and we'll put the pots away. We'll just compost these. They're annual flowers. They won't be coming back. I have a few chrysanthemums in the garden, and I think I'd like to add a few more, so I'll make that a note on my list. If you are planting bulbs, the time to do that is now. This year I'm not adding bulbs to my garden. I will be planting garlic over in the vegetable garden in a little bit. I guess they're a bulb. They are. But I have so many bulbs already here. I'm going to see what is coming up for next year. When I plant the bulbs, I like to put in a grape hyacinth. And the grape hyacinths, I hate to move around on the camera person, but I'm going to do it anyway. The grape hyacinths come up in the fall and with their foliage. This is all right. Nothing's going to happen bad to them. And they will, but they're a good marker. So if you can dig up a few of those and put them in with your tulip bulbs, you will know next fall that something is planted there that's a bulb. I've tried to do this, so you'll see little bunches of grape hyacinths here and there. And that usually means that there's some other type of bulb, a daffodil or a tulip, that's underneath it. It helps to mark the space because right now tulips and daffodils are dormant. They aren't really dormant, they're growing roots underneath the soil, but you can't see them up on top. So you need a marker. You can also use a plant marker, but a grape hyacinth seems to work quite well. I'm going to leave quite a few of the leaves on this garden. I will cut back a few things selectively. One of the things I will cut back are the iris, the Siberian iris, the German iris, and also the miniature iris. I will also cut back some of the grasses. And the reason I do cut back things is because they get kind of slimy in the spring. And I really don't enjoy doing it in the spring, so I'll get it done now while they're still green and fairly easy to chop off with the scissors and just put in the compost. The other thing I'll cut back are the peonies. And I have a number of peony plants. I'll wait until they get a little more brown. There's one down back that's already quite brown and ready to be cut. I'll cut those at the ground level and either compost them, or if they had some disease on them, which I believe that one might have had some mildew, I'll put that one in the trash. This will help with disease prevention for next year. You don't want a lot of wet foliage sitting on the peonies all winter. So a little bit of cleanup and a little bit saved for winter interest perhaps, and also to help the pollinators and some of the other little creatures that need a place to stay, your toads and other things, salamanders, that need a little spot to cozy up for the winter. And then next spring we can do a more thorough cleanup and move things around. Many people do move plants around at this season. I usually do not do it now. I prefer to do it in the spring. The other thing is pruning. You'll notice a lot of landscapers out pruning, but this is not the season to prune. And pruning should take place for fall blooming things in the spring, and that's very early in the spring, and for the spring blooming things right after they bloom. So now is not the time to be doing a lot of pruning. I don't know why the landscapers do it now. I suspect it's because now is the time they are in yards cleaning up and they have the time. But your bushes and trees will do better if you prune them at the proper time. Of course, anytime you can prune broken branches and branches that are touching one another and bushes that are in the way, you can do those at any time, but the proper times are very early spring and then just after the spring blooming things have finished their blooms for the season. Now let's move on to the vegetable garden. Most of the tomatoes have gone, whether the frost, this area tends to get an early bit of frost, though the nasturtiums are still pretty good, which is an indicator. The morning I come out and find the nasturtiums completely wilted and brown, I will know that we have had a killing frost. They go quite early, as does the basil. The basil's pretty much gone to seed. It can be pulled. Parsley will be good, right into the time it snows. And if I cover it with a little straw, I'll probably have parsley for next spring. The other thing that will go quickly are the marigolds that I've planted here and there in the garden. They succumb very early to frost because they are a tender annual. I still have to pick in the garden cherry tomatoes. This one's hanging on and producing a few cherry tomatoes every week or every few days, and I take them in before they're completely ripe so they won't split if it rains. I have a few peppers. I've picked my eggplant. These plants can go because even though they're still here, there's a tiny little one, but the chances of it growing very big are pretty slim. I have a few peppers that I'm still picking and arugula. This is starting to go to seed, but we can still use the arugula leaves. And I have celery, and the inner stalks are still usable. I do have some spinach under the cloth to keep it from getting eaten by rabbits, and it's coming along. I can peek through some of the holes in the cloth and see that it's there. Whether it will have time and enough sun and warmth to progress, I don't know. The other thing I have in abundance is tomatillos. This is the first year I planted them, and they have exceeded expectations, you might say, because they have gotten huge. Most of these little balloons have a little bean of a tomatillo, but if you look down near the base, you'll find some that are, as they ripen and get heavier, they drop to the ground. Next year I will support these. Let's see if I can find one that's completely full. This one's pretty good. Eventually the husk will actually turn brown, but you can see there is a tomatillo in here. And these have been fun. I've made some salsa for today, and we have been enjoying them this year. I brought some last year and tried cooking with them and liked it, and I said, well, I'll put in a few plants. I didn't realize how large they got and how sprawly they got. So next year, we will be sure to put, let's see if I can find a good one here that's really ripe. Again, you have to go through it. Next year I will use some large tomato cages to kind of hold them in so that I can pick them much more easily than digging underneath them to find the ripe ones. I have a bit of dill left. I've made some refrigerator pickles. I had a few hot peppers from the backyard, and I may pickle a few of those. We had a good crop. I've found a place that peppers are happier than here. I've been able to pick a few peppers here, and I don't see any now. I think I got them all before the threatened frost. We have a few flowers left, the Teutonia. I would like to collect some seeds from that so that I can plant a little more next year, but I'm not going to plant it at this end of the garden. Again, it was in the way. Every year you learn a little more about where you want to put things and how to plant them. This kind of got in the way of the gate to the garden. I can still get in and out, but it's kind of tight. So we want to put this far back next year. And I think it's thick enough that it may help keep some of the deer and other critters out too. I'm starting to pick up things, and the tomatoes are going to be going. And many of these have a plant tie on them, and it is either going to be cut and discarded, or I will untie it and save it. So we'll put the spent plants in the compost, and the cages and the stakes will be put away for the winter. We'll get it ready in the next few weeks to be rototilled. I like to wait until after we've had a frost because I want to continue picking things like the cherry tomatoes and the other crops. The celery will come out, the arugula. We'll leave the parsley, that will stay here all winter, as of course will the strawberries. These will get a nice coating of straw or marsh hay and be cozy for the winter. I do need to make the row a little narrower, so we'll move that a little narrower from the edges when the garden's rototilled. I can't reach more than 2 feet to pick strawberries, so I need to keep a row that's 4 feet wide or less so that I can reach to the center of it when picking time comes. I have a bit of Swiss chard and a few radishes left. Again, those will go soon. But the important thing to do now in October is garlic, and it's time to plant it. And I've dug out a row. It's next to where it was last year. I try to move it so it's not quite in the same place each year. And I have some garlic cloves that I got at the farmer's market, which are suitable for planting. You don't want garlic that's been treated not to grow, because then it won't grow for you either. And these are nice cloves. And we want to break these cloves off from the main stalk of each of the garlics. And you'll find 5 or 6 cloves in each one, fewer or more. You can take off some of the outer covering, but not all of it, just enough to get them apart. You'll notice each of the cloves of garlic has a bit of the root end on it. So we're going to plant those about 6 inches apart in the garden. And I'll continue with the rest of these heads of garlic, separating out the cloves and then standing them up with that root end down and then covering them with soil. Once I have the whole row planted, I will go to the compost pile and gather up some compost in a bucket and top them off with a good layer of compost. After that, I'll put straw over them for the winter. So by the time we come again in November, you will see a row with straw all over it. Hopefully the rest of the garden will be tilled and the straw will be here covering the row of garlic. I will leave the string and the mark in to prevent rototiller man from rototilling it up. I will also mark the strawberries the same way with stakes and strings to mark where I do not want the rototiller to go. Sometimes it's not easy to see. Same with the parsley, because that's the other thing that will stay here for the winter. Other than that, I will perhaps prune back some of the raspberries. If I don't prune them now, the ones that bloomed this year, I'll do them again in the spring. That's a good time to do them because that's when I usually burn brush, and I can just include the raspberry canes. I don't really want them composted, but I can include those in the burning of brush in the garden. Over here I have some canna lilies. They didn't bloom this year because the bulbs were rather small, or corms, or whatever they are. And these will be dug once they've frosted and the leaves turn dark. The same with the dahlias that are here, which are still blooming. I'm still getting some nice dahlias on those, which make the bees very happy and make me happy too. But when I come out and I see that they've turned black, it will be time to remove all the foliage and then dig up the bulb underneath, dry it for a few days, and then I'll be storing that in a bedroom that we don't use very much, and hence we have the heat pretty low most of the winter. I don't have a great spot at 50 to 45 to 55 degrees to store things, so you do the best you can in keeping your plants over for the winter. I do have a sunroom, which helps with plants that need the sun, but for those that need to rest in a dark, cool spot, I use a unused bedroom, and that seems to work about as well as anything. Now let's move on to the shade garden. The pond has been netted. After experimenting with several techniques, I use a base from a sprinkler. The sprinkler died, but the base was still good. And the legs are adjustable. I have 2 levels in the pond, so it helps if I can make one of the legs shorter. I use that to kind of hold the net up, and that helps the leaves fly off instead of just falling in a clump in the pond. We still get some leaves in the pond, and they still form some clumps. But it is an improvement over just laying the netting over the pond. I'll be using some cooler weather food now. This is a little more digestible, and it's particularly for spring and fall when the fish still need to be fed because it's still warm enough to feed them. Once the water hits 50 degrees and lower consistently, I will stop feeding the fish because they will stop eating. And they will be fine until spring. They may be a little skinny come spring, but they'll be just fine and we'll be able to resume. I leave the filter falls going and the skimmer until a little later in the season. Once the leaves are down and I can remove the net, I don't leave the net on all winter. I did that one winter and only ended up with a broken net. So we'll take it off once we've cleaned up the leaves around this pond area and any of the flowers around. Most of the plants have been taken out and taken inside. I still have one to pull out, but that's an easy one because it's a small one. But the larger ones have all been taken inside. I need to cut back the iris, or the iris that's in the pond. That stays there and will continue to grow every year. It's a hardy plant. It's in a pot, but it will be just fine. And when I take the net off, I'll cut that one back. Remove the filter, remove the falls, remove all the tubing, and take it in for the winter. That way I can reuse it. It doesn't freeze up, which it might. If you have a pond that has built-in tubing that you can't remove, then you'll need to blow that out so that it doesn't collect water and freeze and break. Once that's all done, and it's starting to be frosty at night, starting to freeze, you want to put in I'll put in this thermal unit. It's Pond Therm, and this actually keeps a hole in the ice. If you have fish in the pond, you need to keep a hole in the ice to exhaust any waste gases, or the fish will be killed. So it's important to keep a hole in the ice, and this will do it. It's a thermostatically controlled unit, so it doesn't use tremendous amounts of power. It does use some, but we'll put that in the pond and let it float there all winter and keep a hole in the ice. If the snow is really high, I may need to shovel it off to make sure it does make a hole, but I try to keep that hole there so that I will have fish next year. I've been able to keep fish over pretty well. I also have a flue tile in the bottom of the pond so that they're able to hide from any predators. Oh, when I put the net up, I was careful to leave some spaces. There's a space underneath, and then I left it over the top of the heron here and left a little area so that the frogs can get in and out. I really didn't want to trap the frogs inside. I have had dead frogs in past years, and so I wanted to make sure that they could easily escape and go someplace else to spend the winter once the temperatures get colder. They really like to be in the pond and in the pond area. I have several frogs that I've come to recognize that are in here or in the area. They go out hunting during the day and then come back at night frequently. There's one sitting right here now, down hiding in the foliage. So I wanted to make sure that they could get out. It may let a few leaves in, but I really don't want to kill the frogs. Now let's go up closer to the porch where I've put a lot of the plants that I brought in or am ready to bring in. This has been, the patio area in front of the windows has been a perfect place for hot peppers. They need a lot of heat. And with the brick walks and the windows and the sun from coming in from the south, they certainly get it, as well as being pretty sheltered. They're still going strong. I planted a packet of assorted hot peppers. So it's interesting to know that I have 4 different kinds in 4 different plants. And I'm not sure what they all are. We've been having fun cautiously tasting them to see what's hot and what's not. And I think the larger the pepper, the hotter, although some of the jalapenos have been hot. This one we've determined probably is a jalapeno. I've had to support some of these. They've gotten so big. And then I have some little teeny ones that are very hot. So it's fun to grow them, and I have found a spot. I will be using this area in addition to flowers to put in some peppers next year. Not sure I want one that gets quite this big, but the little ones are pretty good. I've brought in the pineapple lilies to this area. Once the foliage browns and dies back, I will just let these dry and bring them in the house. In fact, I may not even wait until all of the foliage is gone, but I'll bring them in and keep them dry and let the foliage go. And again, these go in the cool room where they'll spend the winter, and then they come back up in the spring. These have gotten a little congested, so next spring, hopefully I will have the time and remember to take these out of the pots, and they're a bulb underneath and they need to be divided so that I can probably make 4 or 5 different pots with pineapple lilies. Or you can plant them in the garden and they'll grow there, but then you have to dig up the bulbs. Impatiens, I have several. I'm still collecting seeds. These pop right in my hand, and there we go, more seeds. These are a little wet, but they'll dry. I have a whole plastic cup that bottom is covered with seeds. That will be plenty for next year's impatiens to seed them. And I keep looking for these little seed pods to mature. Also in this plant is a begonia, and you can see the red flower of the begonia hanging down. It's a hanging plant begonia. I'm going to remove these impatiens soon and keep the begonia going. And again, I will let the foliage of that begonia go back, possibly, or I may try to keep it in the sunroom for the winter. I'd really like to keep it over and see if I could grow it into the coming year. And it would be nice if I could get it to flower through the winter. I don't know if that's possible. But we'll see if we can at least save the bulb that's ultimately underneath. These are pentas, and I started out with 1 plant, and that was last year. I took cuttings from that plant and potted them into this pot this year, and I have 4 or 5 new plants in here. I cut back the original plant middle of last winter, and it started to grow again, so I have the original plant as well. I really don't think I need 2 of them at this point because I also took cuttings this year. So what I will do is take some of the stronger plants, maybe 3 from this pot, cut them back, put them in another pot with fresh soil, and bring those in for the winter. I just let those in the sunroom and they continued to grow. They didn't bloom quite a lot, but occasionally I'd get a bloom. But they've been very pretty all summer, and we'll keep them over. I've also taken cuttings so I can make a second pot for next summer for outside. Getting ready to feed the birds. I don't feed the birds year-round. I let them forage for their own food in the summer. There's plenty around here. And I do feed them, however, when the temperatures drop, and especially when there's snow cover. And I'm getting my feeders ready to put up. Once my hanging plant comes down, and that one's continued to bloom, but once it is hit by the frost, it will come down. I'll store the container, compost the soil and plants that are in it, and then replace it with a bird feeder. This has held verbena all summer. I planted this verbena in May, and I have gone through and taken off the spent blooms fairly well all summer. Given it a little fertilizer. There's a geranium in the middle also, which has got a bud on it still. And this has continued to grow and bloom all summer. Verbena is a very good plant for your containers because it does continue to bloom. It's hardy a little further south, some of the varieties, but not here for the kinds that you find for your planters. There are a lot of different kinds of verbena, but this type is not hardy, so it will go with the frost unless I were to bring it in. And it's so readily available in the garden centers in the spring that I don't bother taking cuttings because it's not particularly rare. But it does last a long time, and it's a good buy for pots and hanging baskets particularly. Now, I have seeds in hand. Let's take them inside and see what we can do with some of the last of the garden produce and celebrate a little Halloween fun. I'd like to make some fall floral arrangements, and I have a few chrysanthemums that I probably could have cut, but I'm going to use some of the last of the blooms in the garden. Blooms are a little hard to come by now. There's still a few annual blooms that can be used in bouquets, but I want something that looks fall. So I've selected a larger vase and some curly willow, and I use this, I keep it and use it spring, summer, and fall to back up different arrangements where I want a taller arrangement. And I've got a little water in the bottom, and I went to buy some miniature pumpkins because I was going to just make miniature pumpkins in with the branches, and that's very effective without water. Well, they were out of miniature pumpkins, but I did find these wool ones. So I thought, well, we'll use those. And I cut them so that there'd be several different levels. We want to move these around a little bit. Probably to one side more. And this one goes over here. And so we have 3 levels. That was right in the first place. These little wool pumpkins. And then I'm going to use a dahlia. And I'm going to cut it so that part of it's down in the vase and part of it's out of the vase. Pushing things back so that the bottom stems are in the water and the one is up. And then I also have some of these, they're a Queen Anne's lace relative. We can put a few of those in too, just for some extra greenery. And this makes a simple arrangement. And we'll use these in something else another time. But with just a few flowers, you can make a nice arrangement that will last a few days at least. This one's a little taller. It would be nice on a buffet. We're going to use it right here behind our food and keep arranging the curly willow. But it would be very nice on a fall buffet. And it has a bit of a fall look with the colors and the things. And then I'll put a little owl with it to give it a little low accent. Now we're going to move over and do some cooking. I wanted to do some foods that had a little Halloween theme. And I checked on the internet. Boy, there are some nasty looking foods there. A lot of them are really kind of disgusting. And if you have junior high kids, that's probably just what you're looking for their Halloween party. But I'm just not in the mood for vomiting pumpkins and other things like that. Though they're cute, I find something a little simpler and a little easier is better for me at this stage in my life. And I think if you had little ones, you probably would want something a little simpler as well. Again, there's plenty out there for the junior high crowd that wants to be frightened even by their food. So today I'm going to make some little ghost cookies, and this is basically a shortbread dough, and it's pretty easy. It's 1 cup of butter, softened, 1/2 cup sugar, and 2 cups of flour, and a pinch of salt. Mixed together and then chilled. And then I brought it out to bring it up closer to room temperature, but still a little cool, so that I can cut it. You can work with a lot softer dough when you use a canvas and a rolling pin cover. And I have a little ghost cutter. A smaller one would probably be better, but this one will work. And I'm going to cut out some ghosts. And this dough has enough butter in it that you can re-roll it several times without it becoming too tough. You could also use a purchased sugar cookie dough, I would imagine. And we're going to re-roll this. And now they would be cute just as they are, but we're going to give them some eyes using a wooden skewer. And just poking it in. And these will remain somewhat indented. If you're using another dough that rises a little and they don't stay indented, you can always use it again just as they come out of the oven. And the handy thing about this is, if you'll notice, this cutter has a tendency to have the dough collect in the tighter places. So you can use the other end of the skewer just to clean your cutter of all these little nooks and crannies. Anyway, then the next thing I'm going to do is let each of them hold a pecan. And I'll just put a pecan on it and fold his little arms up over it. Something a little different. I've seen it also done with a teddy bear cutter, a smaller one. This adds a little something different. And you want nice whole raw pecans on this because they will get toasted as the cookies cook. And we'll put these in the oven at 325 for about 9 minutes. So I'm going to set it at 8 and we'll see if they're done. Always set it a little less so that you can check them. And the next thing I'm going to make would be a salad. And I'm making coleslaw because I had a cabbage in the garden that I picked, and it's been in the refrigerator for a week or so. Also had carrots, and I harvested the carrots. So I have used my food processor to shred the carrots, the cabbage, and some red onion. I got that at the farmer's market. I could have used my own onions, but I thought the red would be a nice accent. And I need to make some dressing for this. And what I'm going to do is, in a measuring cup, use a tablespoon of sugar and then a tablespoon of cider vinegar. And about a teaspoon of celery salt. I like that as a flavoring. And then mayonnaise. And my recipe is not exact. Some people like a little mustard. Some people don't like the celery seed. But I'll add about 1/2 cup of mayonnaise and mix that with the vinegar and sugar. and celery seed, and that's the dressing for the coleslaw. This is a creamy coleslaw. Some recipes just use the vinegar and sugar. But our family tends to like it this way. The volume will go down as we mix this in. I used a fine slicing disc for the cabbage and a shredding disc for the carrots. And also for the onion. You can also use the hand grater and some of its attachments, but the food processor is really fast. And coleslaw always makes a nice side dish that can be made somewhat in advance. You may have a few larger pieces in here that can be cut up. So I have the coleslaw, and now we're going to make some burgers. And there's nothing Halloween about it yet, but just wait a few minutes. I've started out with a half a cup of oatmeal. I've done these before, but there's something we like so much that it's worth doing again. I use a half a cup of oatmeal, and we're just going to coarse chop it a little bit. And to that oatmeal, I'm going to add some other ingredients. I'm going to add a half a can of beans. And I need, I guess another scraper will work. Half a can of black beans. These are bean burgers. They're vegetarian for the most part, not vegan, however, because we do use some cheese. And I'm going to pulse that in the mixture and then add some other items. I'm going to add an egg, 1 teaspoon of cumin as flavoring, and some salt and pepper if you wish. Just a bit. And again, I'll blend this a little bit. And it starts to look a little pasty, but we'll add some onion and cilantro. And I'm going to add a small onion that's been quartered and 2 tablespoons of cilantro. And this was probably the last of my cilantro from the garden. It's the top leaves, but I want about 2 tablespoons of that. If you don't have cilantro or don't like it, you can use parsley, probably just as easily. And I'm going to chop this quite well and continue processing it until it really becomes a gummy. What it looks like isn't so great right now, but it does turn into a good mixture. I'm going to mix that in with the rest of the can of black beans and 2 ounces of pepper jack cheese, which has been shredded or grated. And this gets all mixed together. And this is the basic bean burger recipe. And then this goes, usually with a wrapper, into the refrigerator for an hour or so to harden up, stiffen up. At which time you can divide it into 4 places and make 4 patties. These can be frozen, refrigerated for a day or so, or frozen for a longer time. I put them between wax paper. And then we're going to heat some oil over fairly high heat. If you have a cast iron skillet, that works well. And we'll fry them on both sides, and then get them ready to put in their buns. Okay, our little ghosts are starting to brown on the edges, and we'll take them out of the oven. And let them cool. And again, if you need to, you can make the eyes a little more pronounced with the skewer. These spread a little bit. If you don't want your cookies to spread, if you refrigerate them before they are baked, right on the baking sheet, it will help with the spreading of the cookies. Okay, now I think we're ready to start serving our meal and finishing it up. I'm going to set up 2 plates today because I want 2 servings here. And I have 2 toasted buns, which I'll put the burgers on. Make sure I get the right end. We're going to turn these into spiders, just for Halloween's sake. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a piece of cheese, and I'm going to have to do this facing me because otherwise I won't get it right. But I'll turn them around later. So I've cut the cheese so there are 2 kind of teeth hanging out, 2 or 3 teeth. These are our spider's fangs. And then I'm going to use some onion rings that I've cooked. And we're going to cut those in half for the spider's legs. And you can do 3 or 4 legs. Spiders actually have 8 legs. They are not insects, they're arachnids. And your junior naturalist would probably tell you that if you put 3 legs on. And I'm going to cut these in half and use them for spider legs. Tucking them in. And I may use 3 or 4. We'll see what works. And we need another leg here. I think ours will be 3-legged spiders today. And I want to get this in on the cheese so they kind of are held in place. And we'll repeat that with the other plate. And the onion rings. Easier said than done here to arrange these, but if you can manage to get it in the cheese when it's a little melty, they should hold pretty well. And then they need some eyes. And for eyes, we're going to use olives, pimento stuffed olives. And I'm going to use a knife to make a little hole so that the olive can be inserted into the bun. You could probably have your buns prepared with the olives in advance. Okay, now we'll turn the plates around, and you can see our little spiders. And we're going to kind of move those to one side if we can and keep our legs together. So we can add some of the coleslaw. And how I'm going to serve that is also a Halloween idea, and that's in a pepper that has a little face cut on it. And I'm just going to use this as a serving bowl for the coleslaw. If you let a little hang out, it becomes kind of like hair. Use your imagination, and we'll put the lid back on. And we'll do the same for the other one. If you need to cut a slice off the bottom, and if it leaves a hole in your little serving container, you might want to put the piece that you cut off back inside the pumpkin pepper, and that will seal up any hole that you make. And as a finishing touch, I'm going to add some tomatillo salsa. This was made with the tomatillos from the garden, the garlic also from the garden, an onion from the garden, and the hot peppers that we showed you that were growing outside. The garlic, peppers, and tomatillos were broiled, and then everything was combined in the blender with the onion to make the salsa. And they will be good on the bean burgers, which have a bit of a southwestern character. Thank you for joining me today. This has been a walk in the garden with a little touch of Halloween inside. And I'm Liz Davey, and you've been watching the show on NCTV Norfolk Community Cable.